Our originally planned speaker, Tomer, could not make it. He had a passing in his family, unfortunately. So we do have a fill-in, Amit Levy, who was sitting there. Now he moved. Okay. But before Amit Levy goes, we will have our mobile gaming veteran, Eric von Coelln, speaking first. And please give a great big welcome to Eric. Hang on. Anybody wants more of these? Heads up, they're a little bit heavy. Oh, wait, one more. Left side of the audience. All right. Thanks, guys. Good touch there. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for having me. I've mouse. Yeah. Mouse. I got two already. No. So I've been over a decade in the games business. The last 5 years in mobile games, and I've been the VP of game opposition and monetization. I've done a lot of different pieces around between product management, building some of the analytics systems, and also just optimizing our revenue and engagement within these games to kind of drive our businesses. I was at Draw Something. Maybe anybody play Draw Something? Hope people know that game is. That was a crazy time. It's a case where we really don't need analytics. Basically, our game got so crazy fast that we actually had to turn off all our analytics servers because we had to do whatever we could to keep the game up and running. So you can be successful without having to do analytics, but that only happens every now and then. So I've been at SongPop for the last couple of years working on their game. Anybody play SongPop? Probably less so. It's like Name That Tune, where you hear a song and you have to guess what the song is. I have over 80 million downloads. So I've been watching a lot of how the mobile game industry works, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But really, the game industry has gone through a lot of different changes. The platforms have changed from being a PC download business when we had games like Bejeweled, you buy on your machine, it costs $20 or $15 to download, and you'd have a short trial period to play it on your machine, and then you'd have to actually pay the money over. And that was the kind of beginning of like a trial before you buy. And now you had Facebook that went next and kind of took over and killed that download business and became the zeitgeist with Zynga and Farmville, free-to-play model. And then we've moved into mobile in the last couple of years. Around 2012, things really started to explode in the space. While that's been changing on the platform level, the tools have been changing as well. When you start off trying to look through, one of the key things we're trying to understand is what's happening engagement inside the game. We really didn't have any kind of web tools or anything else. We really had proprietary systems that would collect some of the data on your back end that you have to go through and analyze. And then in the age of Facebook, more web tools started coming through where we could use Omniture and Contagion and some other devices that allow us to get some data through to understand what was happening with our users and the engagement that was happening, and looking at the funnel and the process. And now we've got cloud-based tools with a lot more capabilities, a lot more power, a lot more computing power for us to go through and collect a lot more details of data. The amount of data that we're getting from mobile exceeds anything we've been able to pull in the past. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the business model and how we look at the business model. And it's a pretty straightforward from the game standpoint. If I can acquire users cheaper than what I can get from them lifetime, then I've got a profitable type of business. If I spend $1 for a user, can I get more than $1 for them over lifetime in my game? And this is, again, this free-to-play model. How do I do that? And from a very simple analytics process, a very simple model is I have a cost per install, and then I have a user that how many days are they playing? Are they playing for a week? Are they playing for a month? Are they playing for 6 months? How often do they play? And what's the average revenue per day that I'm getting for each of those users? And so I can kind of understand what that user might model that out and try to figure out what they're going to be making. And then on top of that, if they are engaged, maybe they'll invite other people to play, and do those users generate revenues, et cetera. So I can use that as a very simple model to look at a kind of understanding of the ROI of if I spend $1 to get somebody, can I make more than $1 back? And I'm going to break down that a little bit in some of the analytics and things that we have looked at. But one of the things that I've seen is that what happens in the last 3 years, especially in the mobile side of the business, is that it's gotten a lot more competitive. The cost to acquire a new user has gone from $1 or less to 250, 350. The number of apps that are in the iOS App Store has gone from 500,000 apps in 2012 to over 1.5 million today. That makes it much more difficult to make this business model continue to work. And that has put more pressure and more depth looking at each of the different steps of the life cycle to make that model work. And that's pushed us to do a lot more interesting kind of analytics. On a very high level, before I had break down each of these pieces, but this is kind of like the overall business model when we're looking at and how we're optimizing each piece of the user experience. There's acquisition, and when we started off, we're looking at acquisition, we looked at just basically how cheap could I get an install. As we went through and looked at more attribution models today, we can get a lot more understanding and depth of looking at the cohorts. In the early days, we didn't really have as much depth to be able to attribute back to what was actually driving the install. We didn't have the understanding of what they were doing as much with that specific cohort. Now with the attribution data, we can kind of look a little bit more deeper. It's not just that it's cheaper, but that we can go through and understand what do they do at the end. It may be much cheaper for me to buy someone in the Philippines than it is in the US, but will they engage? Will they stay with the game longer? Will they monetize at the same level? So having that kind of depth now that we can pull more metadata around what's happening with that user all the way down, we can look at different segments and really focus on, back to the acquisition side, what should we be spending on? So is it cheaper? Is it actually better? Then when we get a user into the game, one of the key things that we look at is when a user's finally downloaded my game, how do I get them to actually stay with my process? How far do they get? Are there drop-off points? And this is one of our clear key funnels that we do for almost every game is you have to set up specific mileposts that you have within your game. Does a person start a game? Do they understand a couple different moves? Do they go further down into that process? Each game has its own metrics that you look at that are success points that you want to track through, and you're tracking that user all the way through that funnel. So in the early days, we had some very light kind of cohorts where we can do things, but it was very SQL. It was very difficult to get cohort analysis. I could use a tool like Flurry for mobile economics, but for mobile analytics. But it didn't have the ability to actually go down and look at the events and what's driving down to those specific users further in. Now I can not only look at a specific funnel and make sure that every person's hitting the stage and where they're dropping off, I can now cut that funnel by additional metadata. So I can look at what system they're on. People who go on an iPad have a very different retention curve and a very different user experience in the beginning than people going on an iOS device or an Android device. Being able to understand those differences help you understand potentially where things are that you can fix to improve the conversion rate of your first-time users to get them into that stage where they start engaging with the game more. And then for retention, I think it's all great that I got the person in to play the game the first time, but do they keep coming back every single day? And we look back at our model, the most important part, besides how much money they were making per day, was how many days do they keep playing. And retention is a key attribute that we look at when we look at our games. When I'm developing a game, a lot of games end up with a first day retention of 35%. And when I talk about day one retention, I'm talking about of the people who installed day 0, what percentage of people showed up on the next day. A lot of games are at 35%. To really be successful, you need something in the 45% range. Really big successes like Crossy Road had 1-day retention of 75% and 30-day retention of 20%, which is huge. They're able to have those users coming back every single day and drive a lot more revenue than a game that may have only a, let's say, 35% and 10% 30-day retention. So when we're looking at the funnel of our users, we're again looking at what kind of retention curves they do. And again, depending on the attribution, where they come from, what country, what demographics, we'll understand which users are best engaging with our game. So we use that and go back to the beginning of this curve and look in the acquisition side to say, hey, this specific type of users are doing well with this game. Let's go target these types of users, and they're going to provide us much more value in the long end. So that's from the acquisition side. I could also use retention to understand maybe I need to make different tweaks to the game. I need to change some of the basic process. So when we look at this, we'll A/B test different types of features or different types of things that have come through the game to see if what happened with this group changes when we change some of the process that someone comes through. So the other part of that model was the monetization. How can I go through and see what they're doing? Is the game generating the revenue that I expected to do? This is really hard to do in the very initial parts of a game when you're testing. Usually when we're doing a brand new game, we'll go through and beta test in a specific market. We'll throw in a cohort of 400 to 1,000 people to get something statistically significant, see how the retention curves are doing, see how the playability is working to see if that game works. But you can't, but when monetization in these types of games is at the 1% to 2% range of people actually spending money in the game, it's much more difficult to get a sizable cohort early on to go through and get some statistically significant. This ends up being, a lot of monetization ends up being after you've launched the game to really get something statistically significant. You can get a feel for whether a game is going to be making money or not if people are starting to buy, but you're not going to have something statistically significant in those early beta parts. But as you go further and when the game is live, you're able then to actually look at different cohorts and see if you put in A/B testing and different types of marketing, different types of changes in the game flow that might drive different revenue and test and optimize that way to drive more money. And again, one of the things that we've had in the past, a lot of times you can get from different reporting systems an average revenue per user. As we all know, averages suck because none of these curves are bell curves in most of these games. They're much more off to the side. And so you really need to take a look at your spenders and segment down to that level to really understand what those users are, why they're spending, and some of the things that drive that. And then the other part is virality. Even if a user's not monetizing, they can provide value to the game. A lot of the games require interaction with other users, or by having interaction, make it more interesting for me to come back to the game. So there's a lot of modeling that's going through and looking at what are the specific pieces of value of the user to try to understand, does this user actually play a lot of games? By playing a lot of games, they end up enticing a lot of other people to continue paying, and those payers keep playing. Some modeling that I've seen that they're playing with out on the West Coast is the ability to go through and say that this specific user taken out of the equation had this much of a variable price or revenue impact on the users. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the retention cohorts. Again, one of the nice things, when we were doing data, we did a lot of, start off with Google, doing some BigQuery. And what I found in my organization is that that's great for the couple people who know SQL to go through, but it was very difficult for a lot of our product managers and other users to kind of go through and easily set up kind of retention curves. And doing things like retention is fairly difficult within the basic SQL. So the nice thing with we looked to work with CoolaData was to be able to provide a much easier tool for our people to go through and really analyze and cut through the different type of data. So they have a simple widget, for example, for retention. You can choose a starting point and ending and measure the number of days, number of weeks, number of months, and look at users within each of the different buckets, and you can cut it and slice it different ways. Then the nice thing as well is once I've got a basic retention kind of curve or system set up, you're taking the user parameters and the session parameters, and you can use those to cut and slice the data even further. So while I have an overall retention, which is great, but it's an average of everybody, let me take a look at the US versus taking a look at somebody in the Philippines, which I bought cheaper. Let me take a look at a specific segment that I acquired through Facebook versus acquiring through another ad option. So each of these ways I can cut the data and kind of understand deeper what the retention and be able to model a little bit more of my lifetime value and model a little bit more of what I need to change in the game. Another thing is we looked at is progression. There's a company I do some consulting with looking at a game, a basic, looks very much like SQL in CQL, but I'm selecting the install date. I'm selecting the level the user has gotten into the game, and I'm selecting the count of the number of users that have gotten to that specific level. And I've got a date range, so while I'm doing the SQL, once I'm done, I have this visualization. A user then can choose any date range they want and look at any date range. It also has doc slicers, and again, this is something that CoolData does. It allows me to take all these different parameters that I have, so it could be the demographics, the version of the app, what platform the app is it iOS or Android, what version of the OS is it, and really understand deeper where different things are happening. So in this specific graph, I'm looking at, one of the things we're seeing here is that the number of users that are getting through, this is almost like retention, but based on how far they're getting into the game. you're seeing that there's drop-offs almost every 5 to 7 levels there, and then it kind of flattens off. This is a game that had an energy mechanic that basically allowed you to play for about 5 levels, and then you can see the drop-off that happened naturally after that. So we made iterations and changes to that to kind of make a different way that you only lose lives when you lost versus having to pay a life every time you started a game. And you can see as well within that, you can see like this brown cohort here has a nice kind of longer tail, whereas something like this dark blue one here has a shorter tail. And then we can dive down into that specific segment and identify what's happening with that group. Is there something different about those users that we acquired? And so that's some of the things that we do and slice and dice a little bit further into that. And another example, again, I'm selecting the game level. I'm selecting what specific area they're in. And then I'm looking at the average time they're taking to make a move. So how many seconds is it taking for them to make this specific move? And in this chart here, what I'm visualizing is that people who are successful are in the green line, and people that fail the level are in the blue line. And so we were able to, if you fail a level, you're probably not as fast, and that's why your time per average guess is higher. And if you're, doing well, then your time is lower. What was interesting is when we did some of this and cut it by some of the different types of groups and install groups, we found that some of our hardcore users who had been playing other types of games were able to guess almost 3 times faster than some other people who hadn't been really successful in the game. And so what that did let us really understand that we need to change the way the game is kind of set as far as its difficulty based on how well the person plays. And that's, again, another kind of way of looking at the data so that we could tweak it and balance it out to make sure that the engagement is not someone who's going to play the game really quick. Draw Something was like people engaged and just played that game so quick and they were done with it within a week. We want something that's going to last a long period of time and to stretch out the time. And so, again, those are the kind of things that you can do with a cohort and understand exactly how they're engaging with the game so you can improve different pieces of the game. So, again, I wanted to go over the kind of the business model. I wanted to go through some examples of progressions that we did. In general, for our specific environment, we had business people who kind of knew a little bit of SQL, but weren't really diving in and trying to understand how to do it. And CoolaData was a great kind of in-between where we could do the SQL queries if we wanted to within their interface, but we could also provide some widgets and slicing that allowed product managers and C-level executives to go through and do some of the data cutting. And so that's my spiel. Quick question, I'll get going on to we have a question and answer session afterwards, I've been told, so I'll get to your questions and be happy to talk more.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so hi, good evening. My name is Amit, and I lead the product at CoolaData. And I want to have a session about behavioral analytics. What kind of questions can we ask about people's behavior, and what kind of insights can we get out of that? But first, before I start, I'd like to get to know you a bit better. So whom of you are doing data IT, like moving data from one place to another? Okay, and are there any analysts, people that actually query data and people that are doing both? So, okay, So our kind of solution, CoolaData, is directed to both, to those who move data from one place to another and to those who analyze it. And specifically, I don't want to focus too much about us, but more about what it is. What is behavioral analytics, and what can we do with it? Okay, so today I guess all of you who are working with data, we are doing some really cool things with data, to count the number of new users, and how, from your users, how many of them are active every day, and you can count the number of monthly active users, and anyone know this? DAO versus MAU, DAO over MAU? So that's the ratio between daily active users and monthly active users, and it's very interesting if I have every user who is active a month, active every day during this month, his like the retention rates are high and he's very much engaged. And if a user is only active 1 day a month, is not that much engaged. So the ratio between daily active and monthly active is very, very interesting.
Did you know I actually coined that?
The DAO of Mao?
Yeah. But we'll talk about that later.
That's it.
I didn't know if you knew that.
And other than that, we know our users' demographics and we know the technology they use. And this is all very interesting, and we can draw some very, very, very nice insights out of those things. And basically, we can have very good KPIs, key performance indicators, and those are great to understand who does what and when. So we can see a curve of like more and more active users, or a trend of a drop with number of new users we acquire, and that's very interesting, because this basically those are the building blocks of monitoring our business and understanding what it is that happens. But when we want to understand how things happen, this is kind of insufficient, because we can see that there's a drop in number of active users, or the stickiness factor is changing, but it's really hard to understand why. And I'm sure every one of you who's an analyst saw a graph once, and he really wanted to understand a point and didn't have the tools to drill in and understand what exactly happens there. And behavior analytics is about that gap. And we're talking about the age of behavior analytics, and we're saying that in order to complete this set of tools, those KPIs, you should have additional tools and look at the user's behavior. And behavior analytics is basically looking at a sequence of actions and seeing that not only we had the number of add to cart events a day, but having more context to that and know the number of add to cart that a discount event happened prior to those, and the number of add to cart who were shared happened after that. Like, have more context about the user behavior. Not just know that something happened, not just have the counters, but have more context. And we think this is very important. And there are some very nice tools known about behavior analytics, and Eric mentioned most, if not all, in his talk. And I guess there are others. And by the way, if anyone wants to mention or respond in between, you're very welcome. But, so just some known tools around behavior analytics. I guess you all work or know funnels. Funnels give us like the amount of users who are going through a specific path that we've designed, and we can see the churn points. And there are cohorts, which Eric mentioned, and looking at the cohorts of users and how do those behave over time. And there's path analysis, which generates a beautiful map of actually how users go through our website. Some very nice path analysis now in Google Analytics over the last 2 years, I think. And those are all behavior analytics tools. You know these? Are you working with those? Not that much. So I'm gonna in this session I'm gonna drill into some of those and how can those be generated with SQL. But basically, not this, but we have specific sessions for every one of those analyses and how are they done and what are the business questions around those. But let's go back again, and why do you need, what is a behavioral query language? So a behavioral query language is a language that enables us to do those types of analysis very easily, and it looks at the user's behavior and interaction. And it is very much directed to querying sequences of events. So we're looking at what happens when, what happens prior to what. And some example of what is a behavioral query language and what can you do with SQL, with CoolaSQL. So first, it is designed to look at actions. So when you write query with CoolaSQL, you can have users who did something or did not do something, users who did anything or did nothing. You can look at sequences to have times when actually things happened prior to what. So sessions that starts with something, or sessions that ended with something, or users who did something and then did something else. This can all be generated in SQL, but it's very, very complex and usually requires joining like multiple queries together. But in SQL, it's more easy. And the reason it is easy is that we think that it's very interesting to look at users' behavior. And there are some specific functions for behavior. So date range, which Eric mentioned and we'll drill into, and time between, looking at times between different actions. So how long did it took to user who performed action A to perform action B? And know, maybe break this down by countries and see how different countries behave in a specific sequence of events. And there are clusters to answer those funnels, cohorts, and paths. And what I want to do is go into some of those functions and understand them together. Again, it's not about the capabilities. Everything here, everything generally can be done with SQL, but with SQL it's rather complex. It might be complex, and in SQL it should be more simple. And the simplicity gives the power to more people to explore the data, and that's very important. So let's. Do you want to have a question, or can we look at some examples? Examples are good. Fine. So let's see what can we do with did, or how will did look in SQL. So in order to analyze users who did something, we'll say, okay, I want to get all the sessions who starts with register. And just by doing that, I'll get all the sessions which the first event in that session was register. Any session who started differently will not be counted here. And basically we have two things here, right? If we take this like separately, there's the sequence section where I say where did it happen, when did it happen actually, and there's a specific event that I want to track. And naturally, instead of saying start with, I can have maybe followed by, and instead of having register, I can have search, and we can even have not. And just by this like two nice sentences, I've got all of my users, all of my sessions that started with register but did not do search. And if I'm an e-commerce business, for example, that's very interesting, right? They visited the website, they registered, but they didn't search for anything. And I guess you can find this in your worlds as well. So again, just a sequence in the event. This is just an example of for actions. And when we look at functions, we think that it's very, actually you all know that it's very important to look at things at specific time frames, and it's very important to be able to like look at specific time frames easily. And so if you write SQL, when you query a date range, you can say things like, first of all, we have specific functions for date range, and then after that you can simply write date range I want to query last 7 days, and this will always be like a moving sliding window of the last 7 days. Whenever I open, there's an run the analysis, or open my document or whatever. And I can even have previous, so I'll always look 1 week back, and naturally it doesn't have to be week. It can be always previous year, previous quarter, and current gives you the time to date. So if I run current week, we'll get Monday to, I think it's Wednesday to, right? So Monday to Wednesday of this week, or current year will give us 2015 up till today. So it's very easy to set a time frame, and it's even easier, or just as easy, to compare time frames. And you can say I want to compare last 7 days to 7 days before that, and we will always know, or week to date with the previous week to date. So that's date. Time between. In time between, I can say something like, select the average time between register and purchase. So how long does it take to users to complete like those 2 steps from the time they register to the application till when they purchase. And I can even be a bit more specific and say, not only that they purchase, I want them to purchase a gold membership at least 5 times. Let's say that makes sense. And only follow those. So if we again look at the data being sent, those are 2 events, register and purchase. And with every event, I can send event properties, which is descriptive data around that event. And for every time a user generates or commit a purchase event, I'll send the membership type of that purchase and the order amount or order total for that purchase. And then later on, I will be able to use that with my queries, running funnels, cohorts, or even with those simple functions. And one other thing that is important for that is, Eric mentioned a lot, is looking just at this number, that average time between things is not really interesting, because I'll see that it takes 1 day or 2 hours. That's not interesting enough. The more interesting thing is now to break this down, so group like select country and group by country and see how different countries behave, users whom I acquired from different countries behaving through this function or this flow. And just as country, I can place A/B test or game version or whatever, and compare different segments, different cohorts through this flow. Path. So we think that path is very important. We call path basically a path and a session. It's just about the same in SQL. And we think that path, one visit, okay, from the time the user started his interaction with the game till the time he stopped this specific session, we call this a session. And it's very important to distinguish different sessions and to analyze sessions like in most granular level. And for sessions, we see a lot of our customers asking those two important questions. First is, how many events are users doing within a session? On average, median, breakdown by country, but how many events do we see in a session, and what is the session length? And then even ratio between those. And so if I see that users, again, I'll go back to Eric's example, so users from the old users, experienced users, they're not old, are having shorter sessions with more events because they understand the logic of the game faster. That's interesting, and comparing those returning users with new users will give me some very nice insights. And doing this with SQL, it's very easy. I just select path count and I'll get the length of the session. And now for funnels, cohorts, and paths. So, any of you generated a funnel in SQL? How was it?
Good.
Good. What do you have to do to generate a funnel? What's the process?
So I generally generate the funnel in the BI tool. I just pull out all my data and then in the BI tool generate the funnel, like how exactly the funnel or path looks like. Yes, there.
So eventually you didn't write the funnel query, the tool?
No, I didn't write it exactly in the query itself. I used the BI tool.
So let's just, so we get the notion of what a funnel is. Funnel is, I want to see all of the users who registered, for example, the first event, and then I want to see those who search out of those who registered. So this is one query, and then the second query is from those who did the second event, and then the third event, and so on. And basically, when we do that in SQL, usually it'll be, and I'll have to join all the groups together. So those who did A, those who did the A and then B, A and then B and then C, and so on and so forth. And that's very heavy to write in SQL. And with SQL, it's very easy. I just say cluster funnel by session. That means I want to look at all of the users all of the steps of a session, just a single session. If it took more than one session, I don't want to count this. So I want to restrict the time that I allow users to complete the funnel, and then just write down the funnel. Start with search, then item view, then add to cart, and then purchase. And naturally, I can have purchase with properties, just as we saw before. So purchase more than with golden membership. And just like that, I generate a funnel. Eventually, I'll get the number, like the result set would be as the number of steps here. So I'll have 100, and then 70, 50, and 30, and then I'll know the number of users who completed my flow. And it's very, again, easy to generate. Same goes with cohort. I'll just say I want to cluster cohort by user country, meaning I want to compare different countries, and then see the user who started with register and then clicked an ad, and I want to see every 30 days. So basically, users who registered, how many of those clicked an ad within the first 30 days, how many of those clicked an ad within 31 to 60 days, 61 to 90, and so on and so forth. And I'll see how long does it take to user to click an ad. And again, naturally, the event names are just for the sake of the example. I can switch those or replace this with any other event name. And then eventually I just group this by cohort name, cohort size, and bucket name just to see like the right groups together and to be able to really easily compare those. And then there's a path. So again, I want to cluster path by session. Match any means I want to see the sessions that starts with anything. I don't care how the session started. What is important is to see that within the session, they did a pass gate at least 4 times, meaning within a single session, they passed 4 gates. The gates, again, is from gaming. You all play casual games, so every once in a while I finish a level and then I have to go to the next level, that's a gate. And then I want to see users who've passed 4 gates within 1 session. And when I do a path, I actually tell the system to show me what happened. I don't know, I want to see those users and show me what happened prior to those events and what happened after those events, like and get a very rich map of what happened. And just another condition. So I want to verify that it did at least 10 events within the session, and I can play with it as much as I want. Again, it's very simple. Simply looping. And those are just some examples. And the way we work with some very nice customers, and they have very complex questions, and we develop the language as we go more and more. And everything is documented here. We have a very large documentation library. You're welcome to look and see examples for other queries and other analysis just to get ideas. And just to close it up, I started with traditional analytics and said that it's very important to measure those KPIs, number of new users, active users, and so on. And it's very important, and you can't do anything without that. But then we think that using behavioral analytics with that is very much completing. And so I encourage you to add additional behavioral tools. It doesn't really matter if you're using CoolaData tools or others, but add additional behavioral tools to your queries to better understand the user's behavior in order to understand not just what happened, but why is it really happening, and understand the causes. That's basically it. 2 sentences about CoolaData. So we were founded almost 3 years ago. We have some very nice customers, and we collect tons of data. And we have some very nice partnerships with Google's and AppsFlyer and Coachella and some other data services. And what our vision and what we see important to doing is not giving you just answer to your questions, but basically generating a machine that will enable you to ask any question you want. Because once you get an answer, it's no longer interesting, and what's interesting is to keep querying. So so the idea is to enable you to ask anything, anytime, on any data. Yeah, and that's basically it. And
Amit Levy, Eric Von Coelln. Thank you very much. We're going to take questions for either Eric or Amit. Who wants to put up their hand for the first one? Questions? Right there.
For your product for generating the SQL or SQL, do you have a GUI interface?
Sure. So just 2 additional words about CoolaData. CoolaData is an end-to-end BI solution. So we do everything from data collection through data visualization. And it's an open platform, so you have every capability that a database has. So you can collect data, visualize it, and then even generate views, materialized views, virtual dimensions, virtual measures. So we actually do everything that is BI with just one system.
But I was asking whether you have a tool that generates equivalents.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Maybe I
Without
can.
having to-
Maybe I can even open it and present it for a second.
So the data has to be within your platform. Can you query any external sources?
Yes. So yes, we both collect data, and we can query external sources, and we can even join data from different sources together. So if you have data in your MySQL or in Google AdWords, and you have data that your applications generate and sends Google data, you can join those data sources together once we're able to look at both.
What are they? Do you have a list of external sources
Yeah, so basically we support
anywhere in the documentation? I mean,
we support every JDBC connection, and other than that, we have various integrations with Google AdWords, with desk.com, with plenty of different Kochab apps layers expanded. The documentation presents all, but we're very flexible. Since we think this is a database, and it's important that it will be open from the bottom, so to enable you to send any type of data in, we're very much flexible in the data that we collect.
another question: are you working with any of the BI tools to provide a new interface to do the queries on your platform?
Yes,
I mean,
but
can I use Tableau to query your?
yes. But then we have our own visualization. You can also use that. I'll open that in a second and show an example. Just a second, okay? Questions to Eric are a good idea.
While he's doing that, does anyone have a question for Eric? Yeah.
We now have natural query processing tools coming up for pulling data, which provides much more flexibility to the product managers or the marketing team so that they can directly pull the data. So how do you see the product going, in that direction?
I think we're looking more towards more predictive modeling, I think is really what we're trying to move towards. Like, for example, in the example we have for retention, as a marketer, I have, once you've left my app, I have notifications, I have emails that are triggered, etc. But the real key is to capture that user before they leave my app, before they leave my application. If I can predict when I think a user is most likely to fall off, whether it be some predictive model based on how frequently they're playing, how many different people they're playing with, how long those sessions are going, if I can start understanding that, then I can start putting in different types of marketing communication, different types of offers, different types of things that might give them to help extend their lifetime within that game. So we're really trying to figure out how can we do more predictive analyzing. In addition, looking at things, right now when someone converts, typically people target the last thing they did, is that the conversion point. What I think we're moving towards is let's look at not over the -1 event, but what was the -2, -3, and -4 events, and understanding each of those as a path that got them to that specific point, so that we can understand and segment users a little bit more cleanly and smartly. And again, do predictive. If we're seeing users come through and not going down the path that we know is the one that typically converts, can we turn around and actually push them towards that path? Or is there a different monetization that we can do with that user? They're not going to monetize maybe by the typical path of buying something in the game, but I can monetize them with ads or some other kind of softer things that I can drive some monetization from those users. So really, to me, from a product management standpoint, it's taking the behavioral data one step further and using more predictive analytics so that we can do more foresight and changing the way users use our apps.
Yeah, so really quick. So we have like the top level of our product is to enable customers to generate those dashboards and to share those to other organizations. And we work with these just as Google Docs. Everything here is shareable, so you can decide exactly who you want to share it with and what type of permission do you want to give. And inside, there's a date picker to choose what date do you want to look at, and maybe just as I explained, last 7 days compared to previous 7 days, so don't compare whatever. And within, there are widgets, and those are analysis. And I can, first of all, I can place those as I want. I can actually, relocate them, drag them, make them bigger or smaller, whatever I want. And the most interesting part is we have a library of analysis here. And you can generate any analysis you want. So if you want to generate a cohort, or a funnel, or a path, it's very easy. I'll show an example. Okay, so just for an example, this is a cohort analysis. Eric also presented it. I'll just very easily select the events that I want to do, did that, or did that, and did not do that, whatever I want. Break this down by whatever I want. Maybe it's weeks, maybe it's traffic sources, or whatever I send CoolaData. And the end result will be a funnel. And same idea with a cohort, and same idea with a funnel. If I'll just be able to get to it, same idea with funnels. So I can look at the funnel. I can compare, break down different groups. I can even mark specific users. Say that I want to see those users who added an item to cart but did not purchase. I can just highlight the group of users whom I'm interested in. Sorry, just too small. And take those users, export the users, and actually get the list of users with users' IDs and whatever I want. So it's not only the visualization, it's everything that is needed to make the company work around it. And eventually also always present the query that we generate, which is always SQL. Because we have an open API, and then if you have another system, maybe a mailing system, they want to come to a funnel every day and say, okay, give me all the users who search and added an item but did not purchase, and then send these users an email once a day. You can query CoolaData via API and get the list. So it's everything that has to do with BI end-to-end. Answers?
Okay. Does anyone have another question? We have time for just one more. Somebody? Is that a hand? Okay. Well, Amit and Eric will be here for one-on-one questions. Also, we have lots of extra cell phone card holders. They're here. Feel free to come up and take them. There is loads of food and beer in the back. You can take whole bags if you like. Help yourselves. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.